Brazilian apartments get called warm so often, the word barely means anything anymore. But the warmth was never about color. It came from architects who refused to let modernism go cold. European modernism, in its purest early form, favored rigid geometry, right angles, flat planes, a kind of architectural discipline that could feel more precise than welcoming. Brazilian architects working in the mid-20th century, most visibly Oscar Niemeyer, took that same modernist vocabulary and deliberately introduced sweeping curves, arches, and organic voids, arguing that structure could move rather than simply stand. This wasn't decoration applied on top of modernist principles. It was a genuine architectural argument that a building or a room could follow modernism's honesty about material and function while still feeling fluid rather than mechanical, human in its movement rather than purely geometric. A curved wall or a rounded piece of furniture in this tradition isn't softening the design. It's continuing an actual architectural conversation about what modern structure is allowed to feel like. This is worth understanding before applying curves in a small apartment, because it reframes the choice from purely aesthetic to genuinely principled. A curved sofa or an arched doorway, chosen with this history in mind, isn't just following a trend. It's borrowing directly from an argument Brazilian architecture has been making for 70 years. A significant part of what makes Brazilian modernist interiors feel warm traces back to a practical historical constraint rather than a stylistic preference. Materials like plastic and refined stainless steel, common in mid-century design elsewhere in the world, simply weren't widely available in Brazil at the time. Designers turned instead to what was actually accessible locally: rich hardwoods, rattan, woven fiber, stone. And that constraint produced a materially warmer, more texturized version of modernism, almost by circumstance. This matters because it means the warmth wasn't achieved by adding luxury materials on top of a cold foundation. It emerged from working honestly with what was genuinely available, letting wood grain and natural fiber texture carry the design, rather than treating them as an upgrade from something more modern. The materials weren't chosen to signal wealth. They were chosen because they were there, and the design built its identity around making the most of them. This principle translates directly and affordably into any small apartment. Choosing real, locally accessible natural materials over synthetic approximations doesn't require an unlimited budget. It requires the same honesty Brazilian designers practiced by necessity, working with genuine material rather than a convincing substitute.
Brazil's climate made a strict boundary between indoor and outdoor space both impractical and, to many mid-century Brazilian architects, philosophically unnecessary. Large, sweeping windows, open floor plans, and structures designed to admit airflow and light without heavy separation reflected an assumption that a home's relationship to its natural surroundings should stay porous rather than sealed. This produced interiors where natural ventilation and abundant daylight weren't amenities added for comfort, but foundational assumptions the entire layout was built around from the beginning. A room designed this way doesn't treat the outdoors as something viewed through a window. It treats the boundary between the two as something to minimize wherever the climate and structure allow. A small apartment, even one without access to sweeping Brazilian views, can still borrow the underlying principle, prioritizing whatever natural light and air circulation the space actually has, rather than treating windows as a fixed architectural feature to work around instead of build toward.
Brazilian mid-century modernism carried an ideological dimension that's easy to miss when the style gets reduced to a visual aesthetic. Architects and furniture designers in this movement, including figures like Joaquim Tenreiro, believed good design had a social responsibility to improve the quality of everyday life broadly, not to remain a marker of exclusive taste reserved for the wealthy. This shows up in the design language itself as a preference for warmth and comfort over ostentation, for well-made simplicity over elaborate display. A chair in this tradition was meant to be genuinely comfortable and well-proportioned for actual daily use, not primarily a symbol of status to be admired from a distance. Design excellence and everyday accessibility weren't treated as opposing goals. This principle is arguably the most quietly important one in this entire video because it reframes what getting warmth right actually means. It was never about acquiring visibly expensive objects. It was about designing rooms genuinely intended to be lived in well, a standard available at almost any budget once the priority shifts from display to daily use.
Where some design traditions build warmth through decorative detail, carved ornament, elaborate pattern, layered accessories, Brazilian modernist interiors tend to build it through texture instead, letting the natural variation in wood grain, woven fiber, and stone surface do the visual work that ornament might otherwise carry. The result reads as rich without reading as busy. This is a specific and learnable substitution. A room can restrain itself from decorative excess, keeping forms clean and modernist in the tradition this style emerged from, while still avoiding the flat, sterile quality that pure minimalism sometimes produces, simply by ensuring the materials present carry enough natural textural variation on their own. Applying this in a small apartment means asking when a room feels underdressed whether the actual fix is adding decoration or adding texture instead, a change in materials rather than a change in the amount of stuff present. Often, the second option achieves the warmth a room is missing more effectively and with far less visual clutter. Mid-century furniture designers, including figures like Jorge Zalsupin, often worked with architectural training and treated furniture design as a direct continuation of a building's spatial logic rather than a separate, later decision. A piece of furniture was conceived to reinforce a room's proportions and flow, not simply to occupy space within it once the architecture was already finished. This produces a specific coherence that's harder to achieve when furniture gets chosen independently from a room's actual structure. Furniture that feels like it belongs to the specific room it's in, scaled and shaped in conversation with the architecture around it, rather than furniture that would look equally at home in any similarly sized room anywhere. This principle is worth holding in mind even without architectural training of your own. Choosing furniture with real attention to a room's specific proportions, ceiling height, and existing lines, rather than defaulting to whatever's popular or available, moves toward this same continuity between structure and object that defines the tradition at its best. Home culture broadly. The living room carries a specific social weight tied closely to hospitality, a space designed and maintained with genuine welcome in mind, reflecting a broader cultural emphasis on gathering and connection rather than formality for its own sake.
This isn't unique to the modernist movement specifically, but modernist Brazilian interiors absorbed and reinforced it, designing living spaces around comfortable, flexible seating that invites lingering conversation rather than a stiff, occasion-only arrangement. This differs subtly but meaningfully from living rooms designed primarily to look impressive in a photograph or to be reserved for special occasions. A living room in this tradition earns its centrality through actual daily use and genuine welcome, not through restraint or preciousness about where and use. Bringing this into a small apartment means resisting the instinct to treat the living room as a space to be protected or staged, and instead prioritizing comfortable, genuinely inviting seating arranged for real conversation and regular use, the same underlying value this entire design tradition places at its center.